To our class. My name is John. Glad to greet you this morning. And good morning to you our online audience who are joining us for our session this morning. If you're new here, our class meeting this morning has this agenda. In a moment, Guy will present a talk that he's prepared on the title and the topic that you see below your screen. That talk will last about an hour, and then we'll take a very short break and come back for an open discussion with the students here in the classroom with me and also with you online. And we'll talk about what Guy presented to us and share our own impressions and questions and see if we can deepen our understanding this Sunday. So those two parts of our class will take us up to about 11 o'clock, and then typically on Sundays we continue the broadcast here in the room, and students here in the room will continue to share things. So those of you online, you are invited to stay for the entire session today, and I hope that you do. During our broadcast, and again, especially for those of you online, if you have any technical issues, you can contact us. Just use the question box on your GoToWebinar control panel, and we'll try to fix whatever is the problem. And you can also send in written questions and comments, and those are relayed to our host, and they relay them to Guy and are part of our broadcast as well. So please do use that tool if you need, and you can also email us at any time during the week or at any time, just support@guyfinley.org, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. Finally, this free online series of classes is sponsored by our nonprofit organization, the Life of Learning Foundation, and we are grateful for your support in helping us in our mission of sharing these ideas around the world. So if you'd like to help us, just go to our website, guyfinley.org/donate, and you'll find many different ways that you can help us, and we are grateful for that support, as many of you have done throughout the 30 years that our foundation has been in existence. So thank you again for your support. This morning, Guy has asked me to read the topic, and he will read the key lesson he has written for today's class. Here is our topic. Discover the healing light in any dark moment of life.
Good morning. And good morning to all of you out there in, I don't know what land it is, Webland, Zoomland, Instaland, whatever land you're in. I'm glad you landed here today. I'll read the key lesson, and then I'm going to spend the rest of the time that we have together, allowing, of course, for our questions and dialogue. Doing the best that I know how to do to show you something. If you knew somebody and they took you to a concert of some kind, where music of a certain objective level was being performed, do you sit there and try to understand the music? Or is the understanding inherent in a part of you that feels the meaning of it, and that meaning is without words, because to give words to the meaning is to limit the understanding of it? I can't express to you strongly enough the required and albeit gradual realization in you that everything that you suffer over is because of an unconscious ideal that you live from, but that you don't know you live from. Sorry, there's an interruption in the room. At first I thought I was hearing voices, which really scared me to death, in case you couldn't tell, because it was accompanied by haunting noises as well. Too bad. I wish more of you would be a little more mindful. The identification with any ideal at all guarantees in the end its corruption and ultimately the destruction of the fulfillment of its possibility. And what is it that you suffer over every single day that you don't know you suffer over, by the way? Other than some form of attachment to an ideal that was formulated and conditioned in your consciousness until it became so consistently present that you believe anything that threatens it threatens you. That's why I asked you that to be through some formulation my mind makes and then creates an ideal out of that understanding, and then I try to live up to the ideal that my mind put together. That's actually called hell. But rather, it is in a ceaseless state of revelation that allows a person a realization of the relationship that they have with the world presently that is unconscious, that they don't understand the nature of their relationship to the world. And that's what this study is about today. The key lesson reads as follows, and I would urge you to write it down and meditate on it, that you might understand it. Here's an inconvenient truth. Being sorry changes little to nothing. Only spiritual sorrow can help lead us to the liberation of transcending the unrepentant self. How many of you are sorry almost every day in one way or another? You may not even know it. If you're negative, you have resistance to an event, and then sorry that you acted the way you did towards that person, not knowing. What is being sorry other than thinking to myself, boy, I should have been different, but I wasn't? Yes or no? And how many times have you been sorry like that? Can you count them? Sorry that you spoke this way. Sorry that you acted out that. Sorry that you made that mistake because you believed it was the best thing to do, but you didn't know you were identified. Sorry that I'm addicted to food. Sorry that I'm addicted to the pursuit of pleasure, when I know in my heart of hearts that not one of those things that I do, living from that consciousness, can bring about a change in it. And then I'm sorry. Isn't guilt a form of sorry? Yes or no? Yes. Don't you sleep in this room. And how many times have you been sorry? Sweet God, you can't count it. The world is cloaked in human beings being sorry that they made war, sorry that their greed produced what it did, sorry that they treat each other the way they do, and not one bit of that sorry changes anything having to do with the suffering. None of it. Sorry that I'm so impatient, sorry that I'm anxious and I spoke to you that way. And you believe when you're sorry that you really are. You are not. If you were really sorry, you would change. Because you would connect the fact that you have that kind of constant being filled with sorry with the consciousness that keeps recreating itself. That's why this key lesson said that only sorrow can help lead us to the liberation of transcending the self that's always sorry. What is this sorrow of which I speak? What brings it about? Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those that mourn. Blessings that you and I know nothing about and that we don't want to know anything about, because our life is dedicated to the riches of whatever that ideal may be. that when I get this and do that and finally get free of whatever it is, then I will be free. And so I spend my life in service of an ideal, of a time to come when I will become other than I am now, which is always sorry. You got it? And how is that sorry always enacted? Yes or no? I have a painful reaction to some condition in life. I react to you, I do something I wish I hadn't done. I look at something happening and I don't want it to happen, and I take actions to try to change or control the circumstance. And inevitably, I find myself on the short end of the stick, realizing that not only did I not change anything real, but what I did was incur a wrath, a second force, a problem that didn't exist until I acted. So I'm actually compounding the conflict that I try to resolve through my reaction. Yes or no? And the thing that's so trippy, an expression from the 60s, the thing that's so trippy is that I believe that I can change the consciousness that reacted through identifying with the reaction it has. Because isn't that what happens? And hiding in all of that is a fact that we as human beings just don't want to, or maybe are presently to even unable to consider. And that is that this consciousness that's always reacting not only has never changed what it reacts to, but it can't change itself. It doesn't suspect itself as being part of the problem. Because when it experiences the problem it created, then it comes up with a solution and sees itself as a maker of solutions, doesn't it? How is this consciousness going to be changed? With God as my witness, until you actually understand the first, foremost part of your life is meant to be spent understanding the nature of this consciousness, and in the understanding and in attending to the revelations that ensue, the work to bring about a change in this consciousness. What's the first commandment in all spiritual teachings other than to seek you first? The kingdom of consciousness in which and through which you can be aware of all subsequent levels of consciousness responsible for the reactions that are ruining this world. To seek it first. And where are you meant to seek it? Within what? Within myself. So we come full circle. My life is dedicated to changing or controlling the conditions around me. My life is dedicated to producing and pursuing the things that please me. That's what my life is dedicated to. And then when all of the things that I'm dedicated to do turn into some dark mass descending on me, then suddenly I'm repentant. Then I'm sorry and I want to change things. But it doesn't even occur to me to change my consciousness, to work on that, which is what we're going to talk about today, until the conflict becomes so great, and by some grace I realize, you know what? I am not going to change the world around me until I change the way I see it. Because it is the way I see the world that I experience. And if I want to change the world I experience, then God, I have to change the nature of the perceiver, my consciousness. And that's where the rubber starts to meet the road. Because up until that point, what do I call trying to change my consciousness? Basically, by and large, what we call our consciousness is what we're aware of in that consciousness that we resist or pursue. Not aware of consciousness itself, but of the consciousness that creates an object for us to become identified with. That's the feeling of my life, is the unending weighing of objects, thoughts, feelings, opinions, possessions, the unending weighing of those things by a mind that first idealized them, manifested them, and now derives its sense of self from those things. That's what our life is spent doing. Can you see that with me? And when all of that is in play and all is well, no problem. But what is the actual nature of those moments when we suddenly are filled with resistance? Our topic. When is it that I'm suddenly filled with resistance? And am I not filled with resistance at the drop of a hat? Am I not filled with resistance before I even know what it is that I'm resisting? You say, they do, this happens, boom. Suddenly there's a contraction and resistance, yes or no? And then the resistance does what? What does the sudden state of resistance in this consciousness do? What does the consciousness do with the resistance that it's experiencing? What does it do? It analyzes, it reconciles through a selection of actions, and then believes, because it's identified with what it will become when it's not in conflict anymore, that it actually solved the problem. But did it? Does it? We know it doesn't. So here's the thrust of the whole talk, meaning what we're going to look at. Until we have a new relationship with this consciousness that is constantly resisting anything that challenges its ideals, there is no way that our experience of life is going to change, period. Until I have a new understanding of resistance, which means the consciousness that's identified with, attached to, and deflecting everything that challenges it. Till I have a new relationship with resistance, I will be ruled by that consciousness and what that resistance in it tells me I have to do to be released from my pain. That's a grand summary of everything that eventually a man or a woman in this world will finally meet. Because until then, all they are doing is allowing the resistance to produce one more time the solution to the pain that it produces. And the pain of resistance is what? Is the pain between the condition and the consciousness that experiences it? Or is the pain in the consciousness that is identified with a condition and then resists anything that threatens its corresponding identity? That's the real conflict, isn't it? That's the real pain. The problem is, and it's a big problem, is that this order of consciousness has no awareness of itself at all. None. How many of you can see that when you act out, when you're cruel, when you're impatient, when you're rushing, how many of you can see in that moment you had no idea whatsoever that you were about to be the instrument of something that was using you to manifest its content? Only after you do that comes, I'm sorry. Yes or no? So this consciousness has no awareness of itself at all. It's an amazing thing. I've been in a body for coming up on 74 years. Where's Babs? Here. There you are. Barbara and I share the same birthday, and she loves it when I remind her that we're about to have another tick-tock on that clock of age. Do you know why you're afraid of aging? Because you believe you're your body. How much pain does it take before you finally understand this body was kaput the moment it came into creation? You're intended to live within it and use it to understand something that cannot die, instead of always being afraid of the death of that body because you think it means the death of you. So here we are, human beings filled with resistance, basically every time somebody starts singing happy birthday. It's really good when you're like 20 or 25 because you're going to get stuff you want. You still really look good, and everything you're getting will make you look better. Later, nothing fits and you don't want anything anyway. Like somebody buying me a hairbrush. This consciousness has no awareness of itself. And it also has no awareness what it does to anybody else. Because when you're suddenly filled with anger towards someone, can't have the anger, the negativity, without resisting something that they have done or said. And then you believe that what they've done or said is the source of the suffering. No, all they did was help you see that within you lives something that's always going to suffer anytime or anyone says something about its character. And until you can begin to create the shift in where your attention goes in the moment of resistance, you will always be used by your resistance instead of assisting the grand forces that produce it to bring about a new level of consciousness in yourself. But as is true with all things of this nature, these questions, before anything like that can happen, we have to have some form of new self-knowledge. Because the only knowledge I have is the knowledge that my mind, in its reaction to this world, has pursued in order to reconcile the problems it meets. What does your mind go looking for when you suddenly feel resistance? Not just now, but your whole life. You're in school and suddenly somebody humiliates you and you feel this resistance. Well, what does the mind go looking for? It goes looking for a power, a possession, or a way in which to deal with the problem. So that's all this consciousness knows how to do with the moments where it meets something that brings up this summary resistance, is look to itself, meaning the consciousness of this world and its content, to find something that will free it from the captivity of that moment. When the only thing it's a captive of in that moment is identifying with the objects this world first gave it to give it an identity. I know these sentences are long, but I have to try to show you the whole picture. Do you understand that? I have to have a new understanding of this consciousness and of this resistance. And until I do, what has been punishing me and punishing you will continue to do so. So now, nice deep breath. We're going to look at something together. I'll try to go as slow as I can. Just listen. Spiritually speaking, but it's true in all worlds, anything that is passive, and that, by the way, includes our unconscious beliefs, the content of our past experience. Anything that is passive can't reveal itself. What is passive cannot reveal itself. Now, how many of you ever wondered those beautiful, I know this isn't a word, I coined them, koanic expressions. If a tree falls in the woods and no one's there to hear it, does it make a sound? How about, what's the sound of one hand clapping? Yeah. I'm going to explain it to you today. Or at least I'm going to sing it to you so that you might hear it and see it. Because the idea of a tree falling in the wood and no one there to hear it, or the sound of one hand clapping, the Buddha wasn't talking about hands, and he wasn't talking about trees. And he wasn't talking about forests. He was talking about relationship between active and passive forces, as I'll explain to you. What is passive doesn't know itself, and it can't. How can something that is passive, meaning that is just sitting there, how do I say this? Can anything that is passive know itself unless something acts upon it to bring it into an awareness of itself? So that whatever is passive can't have awareness of itself unless something touches it and brings out of it whatever the latent quality or character is of that which has been touched. Please? Because unless something acts on it, like for instance, what is a sheet of paper without a pen and a hand? Why does paper exist? It exists as part of a relationship so that something can act upon it to bring out its latent quality. And what's the latent quality of a piece of paper? It can hold what is written upon it. An empty canvas can reveal a painting, but only when something acts on it. And then the thing that is acted on, its potential is brought to life. Do you see it? Suddenly, it has a reason for being, and part of its reason for being can't be known until something actually acts upon it to manifest and reveal that purpose. Please? Now, the last thing that this passive consciousness wants to know, and let me back up. What is a passive consciousness other than a consciousness that is unaware of itself when something acts upon it? When it acts out of being spurred into a moment. It doesn't know anything about what was spurred. It only knows that it's got to giddy up to get something done to resolve what acted on it. So this consciousness, though it professes otherwise, and it does, The last thing that this consciousness, our present consciousness, wants to know, the last thing that it wants to see is what the revelation of some light acting on it, revealing as what it holds sacred, as negating what it holds sacred. That's the last thing that I want to see. The last thing that I want to experience is a moment where life comes along and shows me for the 50,000th time that my identification with X, Y, and Z is useless. That's the last thing I want to know. How about you? So I say all the time that I want to wake up. I want this consciousness revealed, don't you? And I love it when life corroborates what it's identified with, its ideals. But the moment that life comes and stirs this consciousness and shows to it, and shows it, wakes it up to show it momentarily that what it is identified with is the source of its pain, not the source of its satisfaction. Because what happens if a consciousness sees that everything it's identified with, that it ostensibly pursued to protect itself, what if that consciousness sees that everything it's created to protect itself is the source of its fear? What would happen to that consciousness? Does it go, oh, this is beautiful. Thank you for showing me that I've spent 30, 40, 50, 60, 74 years developing further and further my identification with something that this moment of light shows me is useless. What do you think the moment of death is that you fear, by the way? Other than suddenly discovering, oh my God, I'm going to die. And in the moment of that revelation that this mortality is inescapable, unlike the immortality of a consciousness that imagines itself eternally, then suddenly, what have I done with my life? And those moments of sorrow are far too few in between, aren't they? Where a man having a heart attack says, I'm never going to eat a cheeseburger again. And 6 months later, he's the #1 patron when McDonald's opens their drive-through window. How do you explain that? I am explaining it to you. That consciousness was momentarily awakened to the futility of everything that it's embraced. And in that split second of seeing that it's embraced what never serves it, the embrace drops, doesn't it? But that consciousness, unrepentant and unchanged, is too quick to come back and begin to embrace the thing that it was most familiar with and comfortable embracing. Yes or no? So the task here is to understand there's something in me that wants nothing to do with anything that shows me that this consciousness and all that it holds sacred and true, that this consciousness knows nothing about the truth, let alone what's sacred. That's the last thing that I want to see. Now, maybe have you had some experience with that? Yes or no? The shock of that revelation is the first gap between our present level of being and what we have been called to realize as part of its higher possibility. Let me explain. The shock of revelation, of suddenly seeing this consciousness is unaware of itself, and in its unawareness it has developed itself, or more accurately, consciousness develops itself as the world sees to its development. In the shock of that sudden revelation, I see I've missed the mark. I see that I love the wrong thing, and the things that I love produce fear. I see that I'm identified and attached to things that, while I'm busy identified and attached to them, make me feel like someone special. I'm loved, I love people, I'm quite unique. And then the very consciousness itself I see in that moment is the source of all my anxiety and fear, that something will break up and fall apart and I won't be complete as I've imagined myself to be. The shock of that revelation that consciousness can't give itself that shock, can it? Can a consciousness that has missed the mark knows that it missed the mark? So something must show it, mustn't it? That it is not what it is intended to be, that there is something more accurately stated. There is something that it can become if it is properly in relationship with what acts upon it. You drop a match that's not lit on a log, what happens? The log remains passive. Nothing changes and transforms the log into energy. But you light that match, and then the potential in that wood to release the energy in it to give you warmth, suddenly that log serves another purpose altogether because it has been acted on something that brings out of that passivity something that is newly active, creative, and constructive. Yes, please? So that first shock is because by the grace of God, something has come along and shown me that I have not been and done and lived up to what it is that is a possibility for me. For instance, how would I ever know how terrible it is to be an impatient person unless one day out of the clear blue sky, suddenly something revealed to me not just the pain in being impatient, but what my impatience does to others? How would I ever know that? That consciousness can't know that, can it? Which is why it goes on being impatient. How would I ever know that my witticism, my sarcastic remarks, how would I ever know, for instance, that I'm always, without knowing it, protecting some image, making a comment to somebody for fear that they would see me other than I want to be seen? And suddenly there I am aware of the weakness in that. I don't think that I'm being weak when I'm fawning. I think I'm being smart and proactive. But the truth is, suddenly I see, why would I say something like that? Unless I was afraid, unless there was something in me that was threatened. And I didn't know that I was always talking like that for the whole of my life. And then boom, I have something and it shows it to me. And what is it that shows me that level of consciousness other than what is calling that consciousness to transcend itself and enter into a new order of being that allows it to be properly active in the right place, the right way, and the right time? A lot of words, but I'm hoping you're following me, yes? So that consciousness can't change itself, and yet, yes or no, were it not for a sudden light of an awareness that it doesn't understand, that awareness shows that consciousness something about itself that without that light, it would never know was a limitation. It would actually believe, for instance, that its pride and arrogance is a positive, wouldn't it? That its anger proves strength. And then suddenly, by the light of that awareness, suddenly I see, my God, this isn't strength, this is fear. Wouldn't that be extraordinary? Now, you can see the goodness in that, can't you? What does that consciousness think about it? Come on, what does it think? No. No, 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 no. And then when it says no, meaning, what is that no? A summary resistance to the revelation. Isn't that what the no is? A summary resistance to the revelation. And it never knows that it had a summary resistance to the revelation, because the moment it has seen something about itself, it gets busy through its reactions, formulating what it has to do to justify itself or to make a plan so that it's not what it sensed it was in that moment. I thought I was, I could see I acted out of weakness. The answer is more money. There is no answer to your sorrow tomorrow. Period. How many of you like that? No, I don't like that at all. Because tomorrow is where all of my hopes are. And tomorrow doesn't exist apart from a consciousness divided up into something that doesn't want to be what it is and then imagines what it needs to be so it can escape the pain of its own judgment. The task has nothing to do with tomorrow. The task of transformation is here and now, and it always is, as I'm going to show you if you will stay tuned. So clearly, here's this moment. I don't know that I'm about to do something, be something, act out something for the billionth time. And no more do I get started on it than boom, something comes along and it shows me what I was unaware of the moment before. And in the moment of that awareness, I'm present to a certain space, an interval that exists between what I am that I didn't know I was, and the possibility of being something other than I am that by its grace is showing me the need to let go of who I've been. There is an interval, isn't there? We've talked about it a little bit. But that space between the sudden awareness of what I am and the active force, the light that showed it to me, that light, if a sudden awareness of the way that I am could change the way I am, wouldn't I have been changed by now? Yes or no? Because I know, especially you local students, I hope for everybody out there, I see these things, I get the revelation, I get the shock. But apparently the shock by itself doesn't add up to a change in the consciousness, because I've had a lot of shocks. And it's quite clear that the consciousness that's shocked by what it sees by itself through the light that came to do it, it can't change itself, or it would have done so. It keeps dreaming it can change itself. It keeps coming up on a time when it won't be the way it is, but that time never comes. It just reincarnates itself. So here we are with two things. One, a consciousness that cannot change itself, and a light that comes along to show that consciousness that it hasn't changed, and neither one of them by itself can change anything. Well, what has to happen? Something has to be laid down. That space, that interval needs to remain intact, and it never does. Because that gap is always filled with a reaction on the part of the consciousness that did not want to see itself as it is. So it always has a thought, a justification, an explanation, something to blame, a next plan, a next trip, a next pleasure, just like that. Always in an instantaneous dream that allows it to escape, seemingly, the realization of its level of being. And no matter how many dreams that consciousness escapes into, does it actually escape itself? Or is the dream of its tomorrow complicit with the continuation of itself and its actions today? You know the answer. Something has to stand in that space. And why must something stay in that space? Otherwise, what would be the purpose of these two things? What did Scrooge say to the ghost of Christmas present? Would you show me these things? The ghost of present, future. Yeah, he's looking at his grave after being shown all that he's been and done. Why would you show me these things? And then it dawns on him. The only reason you're showing me these things is because it means I can change. Because otherwise it'd be torture. There'd be no intelligence. There'd just be hell. There'd be no compassion. So suddenly the revelation of myself as I am that we take as condemnation. And why do I take the revelation of myself as I am that I then judge? Why do I take it as condemnation? Because I'm not the ideal I've imagined myself to be. But it's not condemnation. We condemn ourselves without knowing it by identifying with the unconscious reaction that this nature has every time it's shown something about itself. So now let's look at how is these two seemingly disparate forces, how do they work together? How are they reconciled? Are you interested in this? In the New Testament and other scripture, there are certain writings. Some of them tell the whole story, actually. But our minds are such undeveloped. And the world, as it is, so intent on seeing that you remain conditioned to what your consciousness sells you. What do you think the world is that's always selling you something? Do you know you're always being sold something? I don't just mean in commercials. You're your own commercial sponsor. You are. And it just runs commercial after commercial. You want to know what your mind is doing all the time? Watch commercials on TV. Commercials on TV are the manifestation of a consciousness creating ways to escape itself. showing you this pleasure, that power, that place, these possessions, all that you can become. Where do you think that comes from other than a consciousness that has to manifest in the world the way in which it can escape itself in its essence? The saying that I'm going to read to you is very brief. We've talked about it before, but I'm going to go into depth today. It's out of John 1:5. But there are parallel passages. I won't have time to relate to them today because I'm going to run out of time. I already know it. Christ was talking to his disciples, which I have to assume had some understanding in some way, much as you're being taught some understanding here, asked to listen to some understanding. The light dwelleth in the darkness, and the darkness comprehends it not. The light dwells in the darkness, and the darkness comprehends it not. Now, the only way, in those days, the words that were used, the Aramaic, the words that were used, every beautiful word, our language is bankrupt, but in those days, words had multiple meanings, and depending on the order in the sentence they were placed and the context of the words that were in that sentence, all told separate stories. But in this instance, the light that dwells in the darkness that the darkness doesn't understand, the word light wasn't just a noun. The word light was also a verb. So that it conveyed the idea of light, that it wasn't just a ray of light, as in a noun, but it was a ray that acts to make evident everything that it is touching in the dark. So that it declares even as it helps discover. By the light you discover something, but the discovery is a declaration by that light of what's in the darkness that it's revealed. Please, do you understand that? I don't know how to make that any simpler. You turn on a light in the room. What happens when you turn on a light in the room? You see everything that's in there. So the light is a noun, and then you hit the switch, and then the light becomes a ray. And the ray touches everything that's hidden in the room. So the light declares the objects in the room, doesn't it? Spiritual light declares the content of the consciousness that it enters into. That's the light. I am the light, said Christ. I am that which reveals to men and women the content of their consciousness. A declaration of all that is undiscovered and remains undiscovered unless that light that is in the darkness, again, the consciousness doesn't know itself, does it? Does it? No, but the light knows the consciousness. And how does the light know the consciousness? Because it is acting upon it all the time to reveal it and to bring out of the content of consciousness asleep to itself the fulfillment of its possibilities, much as a flame brings out the possibility of a log. A light that makes one's thoughts known. This consciousness doesn't know its own thoughts. It believes the thoughts it is given by its resistance and reactions validate its identity. But it doesn't know. Would you say the things that are cruel? Would you do the things that harm you if you were actually aware of the thought and the desire behind it that produced that action? Would you? Never. An order of an awareness that produces in what is unconscious the awareness of itself. Following me, everybody? So there is indeed a light in the darkness that makes what is in the dark momentarily aware of itself. Would you agree? But here's the rub, and I'm about to do some rubbing here. That light in the darkness that the darkness doesn't comprehend is not momentary. It's always there. In fact, the darkness doesn't exist without it. What is even Einstein? Darkness is the absence of light. You bring in light and suddenly that which is not part of that light, meaning another form of itself. Oh, I just want so much to share of these things. It's actually painful. It is. My life is finding a way to turn my inability into an ability to better convey to you the things that are given to me to convey. That light that lives in the darkness knows everything about the darkness it lives in. But the darkness that has the light in it knows nothing about the light, and it knows nothing about itself. And were it not for the relationship between the light that lives in the darkness and the fact that that light acts to reveal the content of that unconscious nature, were it not for that, no human being could wake up. No human being would ever know anything about the kingdom of heaven. Because the kingdom of heaven in scale and level exists in the space between the revelation and what is revealed, and the transformation of it accordingly. The transformation is the freedom. The transformation is creation. It is the act of the Creator integrating the opposites, called what is unconscious and that which reveals the content of it. To begin to understand this is to beginning to bring yourself into a new relationship with life, quite literally. Because if I actually understood, and I bring you in, if I actually understood, how many of you are resisting hearing me? I mean, it comes up, doesn't it? I don't understand. What if I actually understood that my relationship to the resistance is summary, it's unconscious. I don't know what else to feel other than not want. Other than no with anything that challenges my intellect. All I know is that relationship of an unconscious nature. But I'm trying to show you as best I can that until that unconscious relationship with resistance turns into an understanding that allows that unconscious resistance and my relationship to it to become a wish to be aware of the resistance and the consciousness that creates it. Until that happens, what can possibly change? Do you follow me? That's what the work is. And the only way in which that work takes place is in that space between what I have been and came into this life with in this moment and that which shows it to me, and by showing it to me says, Guy, you are called to be other than that. It doesn't say what you're called to be. It just says, this has missed the mark. It just says, this can be better than that. It just shows by its light that there's still darkness there that has not been changed into fulfilling its potential. And the potential is endless because God in His goodness is endless. And yet, taken in the whole, you can see this thing just does nothing but not want, resists anything that doesn't align with what it says it must do and be in order to be complete. And so it completes itself. And that's what fills that space, is the sudden desire to escape the negation of itself and through some kind of positive affirmation come up with that which will allow it to get through that moment where it has been brought into that emptiness so that something can come into that emptiness and fill it and change the relationship between the observer and the observed. If I could change the way I deliver talks, I would, but I can't. I've worked for over 40 years now. So let me show this to you, everything that I'm talking about. You ready? Here we go. Nice deep breath. Let me see you look like you're actually alive. Spark of life. I hold in my hand, at great cost to the management, a piece of magnesium and a little blade of some kind. Now this flint is what? What does this flint do? What's its purpose? Well, in order for its purpose to be fulfilled, it has to have something that does what? That strikes it. Now, to be clear, this is passive, isn't it? And its passive place in existence has virtually no meaning, has no purpose, unless in its passivity, something that is active comes along and goes, "Hello, Mr. Flint. I'm the striker." Like kindergarten. Yeah, okay. What do you want? Whoa! What just happened? And what is active, having struck one is passive, did what to what is passive? What did it do to what is passive? It produced a light. And in that light, suddenly what was passive and didn't even know it existed, suddenly sees itself, doesn't it? Because without that light and without something striking it, what is this other than just a piece of magnesium doing nothing? In no relationship at all. What is the sound of one flint without a striker? Remember I said I'd explain to you what is the sound of one hand clapping? There is no sound. In order for there to be a sound, I even experimented with this while I was sitting here. Clap your hands. Do it again. Keep going.